Tonight, we are not traveling to the distant past, but to a time still within living memory, a period shrouded in secrecy, paranoia, and the grim pursuit of knowledge at any cost. We are going behind the Iron Curtain, into the cold, sterile world of Soviet science. Our focus is not on the grand narratives of the space race or nuclear arms. We are searching for something more elusive, more unsettling. We are looking for the lost experiments conducted in the shadowy world of Soviet psychology and physiology labs, specifically those that sought to conquer the very nature of sleep itself. The story that has trickled out of these forgotten facilities is not one of discovery, but a chilling cautionary tale about the darkness that can be unleashed when the delicate mechanisms of the human mind are pushed beyond their limits. Before we open these sealed files, I want to thank you for returning to this space. Your continued presence is a quiet encouragement. If you find a certain calm in these explorations, a simple like or subscribe is a wonderful way to show it. And as our global community grows, I'm always so glad to see where you are all listening from. If you're so inclined, a comment with your city and time is a small, welcome reminder of the connections we share across the quiet hours of the night. Now let the noise of your world recede. Allow your body to find its point of stillness. Let your breathing deepen. We are about to enter a world of clinical observation, of relentless stimuli, and of a sleep that was not a refuge, but a terrifying unknown country from which some never returned. Our story begins in the late 1940s, in the paranoid post-war landscape of Stalin's Soviet Union. The Cold War is in its infancy, and a silent, desperate arms race is underway. But it is not just an arms race of bombs and rockets. It is an arms race for the human mind. Both superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, are pouring vast, secret resources into understanding and manipulating human psychology, physiology, and endurance. They are searching for the key to creating the perfect soldier, the perfect worker, the perfect agent, a human who can operate beyond the normal, limiting boundaries of pain, fear, and, most importantly, exhaustion. Sleep, from a purely utilitarian military perspective, is a strategic liability. A soldier who needs to sleep for 8 hours a day is a soldier who is non-operational for a third of his life. An enemy who can function without sleep would have a staggering tactical advantage. And so, in a handful of secret, closed research facilities, known only by sterile alphanumeric designations like Facility 7 or Research Institute 21, a series of radical experiments began. The most infamous and perhaps apocryphal of these is the one that has come to be known as the Russian sleep experiment. It is a story that exists in the grey zone between documented fact and internet folklore. A modern ghost story with a chillingly plausible scientific core. Let's imagine the setting: a small sealed chamber deep within a vast concrete research complex somewhere in Siberia. The chamber is stark and functional. It contains 5 simple cots, a toilet, a sink, and a small library of books. It is observed through a thick, one-way porthole of glass. Microphones are hidden in the walls, capturing every sound. The 5 subjects of the experiment are political prisoners, enemies of the state, men deemed expendable in the great grinding machinery of Soviet progress. They have been promised their freedom if they can complete the experiment, 30 days without sleep. To achieve this, the researchers have a new experimental tool, a stimulant gas, a complex psychoactive compound derived from early research into amphetamines and adrenal hormones. The gas, referred to in the fragmented reports as Nikolaev's gas, is designed not just to keep the subjects awake, but to do so with minimal physical degradation. It is to be continuously mixed with the oxygenated air being pumped into the sealed chamber. For the first few days, the experiment proceeds as expected. The 5 men, buoyed by the promise of freedom and the initial euphoric effects of the stimulant gas, are talkative and cooperative. They read, they exercise, they engage in long animated conversations with each other. They seem to be in good spirits. The researchers, observing from their sterile control room, are pleased. The gas appears to be working perfectly. The men are not showing the usual signs of sleep deprivation, cognitive decline, irritability, physical exhaustion. But around day 5, something begins to change. The tone of their conversations darkens. They begin to speak of past traumas, of the events that led to their imprisonment. They become paranoid, whispering to themselves, their eyes darting towards the one-way mirror and the hidden microphones. They cease to speak to one another, instead choosing to murmur secrets into the microphones, as if trying to win the favor of the unseen researchers by betraying their fellow prisoners. By day 9, the first subject breaks. He begins to scream. He runs the length of the chamber, back and forth, for hours on end, screaming at the top of his lungs until his voice is a raw, hoarse whisper. The other subjects do not react to his screaming. They continue their silent, paranoid whispering to the microphones. Then, even more strangely, after hours of screaming, the man's vocal cords apparently rupture. He can no longer make a sound, but his mouth remains open, his chest heaving in a silent, unending scream. The researchers, while disturbed, are also fascinated. The subjects are still awake. The experiment is, technically, still a success. Then, the other subjects begin to exhibit their own forms of psychosis. One tears a page from a book, defecates on it, and calmly begins to paste the foul mixture over the glass porthole, obscuring the researcher's view. Slowly, methodically, all the subjects begin to do the same, until every porthole is covered. The screaming stops, the whispering stops, the chamber falls silent. 3 days pass. The researchers have no visual contact. The microphones pick up only an occasional faint murmur. They check the oxygen and gas consumption monitors. The levels indicate that all 5 men are still alive, and are, in fact, consuming more oxygen than before, as if they are engaged in strenuous physical exertion. On the 15th day, the researchers, their curiosity and concern finally overriding the experimental protocol, decide to open the chamber. They announce their intentions over the intercom, informing the subjects that they will be coming in to test the microphones. "We will be opening the chamber. Lie flat on the floor and do not resist. Compliance will earn one of you his immediate freedom." A single calm voice replies from within. "We no longer want to be freed." The researchers, chilled by this response, proceed. A team of soldiers is assembled. At midnight, they unseal the heavy door and throw it open, flooding the chamber with fresh air. And then the screaming begins. But it is not the screams of the prisoners. It is the screams of the soldiers. One by one, despite the doctor's efforts, they die. As the last one's heart finally gives out, a nurse, in a moment of terror, asks him what he is. His last words, whispered through cracked, bloody lips, are, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that you cage inside yourselves every night when you slip into the quiet of sleep. We are what you run from in your beds every single night." The story is, of course, almost certainly a work of fiction, a brilliant piece of internet-age folklore. There is no hard evidence, no declassified document that confirms such an experiment ever took place. But let's pause here, in the quiet of our own comfortable rooms. Let's not dismiss it so easily. Let's treat it as a thought experiment. Let's be a little scientific. What does this story, myth or not, tell us about the nature of sleep and the human mind? Sleep is not just a period of rest for the body. It is a vital, complex, and still poorly understood process of psychological maintenance. Every night, in the theatre of our dreams, our minds process the events of the day. We consolidate memories, we work through anxieties, we confront our fears in symbolic form. Sleep is the pressure valve that allows the immense chaotic energy of our subconscious to be safely vented. The human mind, the story suggests, is a self-regulating ecosystem. And sleep is the janitor, the librarian, the therapist who tidies up the chaos of our waking hours. What happens when the janitor is fired? What happens when the library is left to decay? When the therapist is locked out of the office? The subjects in the story did not just stay awake. They were cut off from a fundamental part of their own humanity. The normal nightly process of psychological cleansing was halted. The psychic garbage, the traumas, the fears, the paranoia was left to accumulate. The stimulant gas did not just prevent sleep, it broke the feedback loop that tells a mind it is time to shut down, to heal. The self-mutilation, in this light, is not just a random act of psychosis. It can be seen as a desperate, horrifying attempt by the subjects to physically externalize the immense internal pressure they were experiencing. Their minds were screaming, and with no outlet in the world of dreams, the scream had to be carved into their own flesh. The final chilling statement, "We are the madness that you cage inside yourselves every night," is the story's central, terrifying hypothesis. It suggests that our sanity is a fragile, constructed thing, a state of equilibrium that is actively and nightly maintained by the process of sleep. It posits that beneath the calm surface of our waking consciousness, there is a deep, primal chaos, an ocean of irrational fears and violent impulses. Sleep is the seawall that holds that ocean back. The Soviet experiment in this fictional telling was not just a failure to create a super soldier, it was a catastrophic breach of that seawall. The researchers, in their hubris, did not just keep the subjects awake. They unleashed the abyss that resides within the human psyche. Let your mind drift on this thought. Consider the sheer quiet miracle of your own nightly sleep. It is not just a passive state of rest. It is an active, vital process of self-preservation. Every night you are not just recharging your body, you are rebuilding your sanity. You are wrestling with your own inner demons in the safe, contained arena of your dreams. The Russian sleep experiment, whether real or imagined, is a stark and terrifying reminder of what we are running from and what we are running to every single time we close our eyes. It is a ghost story that haunts the very edge of scientific possibility, a whisper from a sealed room, reminding us that some doors within the human mind are best left unopened. As the metaphorical screams from Facility 7 fade into the static of folklore, let us turn our attention to a different, more insidious line of inquiry. If the direct elimination of sleep proved to be a catastrophic failure, perhaps a different approach was needed. What if sleep could be controlled? What if the dream state itself, that private, chaotic theatre of the mind, could be infiltrated, monitored, and even directed? Our journey now takes us into the world of Soviet parapsychology and dream research, a field that in the West was often relegated to the fringes, but within the Soviet Union's closed materialist system was sometimes pursued with a chilling seriousness. If the human mind was simply a complex biological machine, then dreams were a form of data output, a signal that could potentially be intercepted and even reprogrammed. Let's imagine a different kind of laboratory, not a sealed chamber of horrors, but a quiet, insulated sleep laboratory in Moscow or Leningrad in the 1960s. The technology is more advanced now. The subject, perhaps a volunteer from the military, or a university student chosen for their psychic sensitivity, is not gassed, but is lying in a comfortable bed. Fine wires run from their scalp to an electroencephalograph, or EEG machine, its pens scratching out the rhythmic, spidery waveforms of their brain activity on a long roll of paper. The goal of this research was multifaceted. The most benign aspect was an attempt to accelerate learning. Soviet psychologists like Vladimir Rykov experimented with what they called hypnopedia, or sleep learning. The theory was that the mind, in certain stages of sleep, was highly receptive to suggestion. A student could, in theory, learn a new language or memorize complex equations by having the information played to them as they slept. While Western research found little evidence for the learning of complex information, some Soviet labs reported remarkable successes, claiming they could improve memory and even instill complex skills through hypnotic suggestion delivered during specific sleep cycles. But the research had a darker, more strategic application. If you could teach a person French in their sleep, could you also implant a post-hypnotic suggestion? Could you create a sleeper agent, a Manchurian candidate, who could be given a trigger word or phrase while dreaming, which would then compel them to perform an action, espionage, sabotage, assassination, when awake, with no memory of the original command? This leads us to the strange and controversial work of scientists who explored the concept of teledreaming, or induced dreams. The research drew on the burgeoning field of bioelectronics and the study of electromagnetic fields. The hypothesis was that brainwaves, the very electrical signals being recorded by the EEG, were not just internal phenomena. They believed that these signals radiated outwards from the skull in a faint, but theoretically detectable, electromagnetic field. If you could detect this field, you could, in theory, read the basic emotional content of a dream from a distance. But the truly radical idea was to reverse the process. If the brain radiated a field, could it also receive one? Could you use a precisely calibrated, low-frequency electromagnetic field to influence the brain's own electrical activity, and in doing so, guide the content of a person's dreams? Let's re-enter our quiet laboratory. The subject is now deep in REM sleep, the stage where vivid dreaming occurs. The EEG pens are tracing a frantic, chaotic pattern. In the control room, a researcher is not just observing, they are operating a device known as the LIDAR machine, a real, documented Soviet device used in psychiatric and physiological research. The LIDAR was a pulsed radio frequency generator designed to produce a calming, trance-like state in patients. It was a form of electronic tranquilizer, but in our speculative experiment, its purpose is different. The researcher is not trying to induce a general state of calm. They are modulating the frequency, pulsing it in specific rhythmic patterns, attempting to synchronize their external signal with the subject's own internal brainwaves. They are trying to piggyback on the natural dream process. Imagine the researcher's goal is to induce a specific emotional state. Perhaps they want to test if they can create a dream of intense fear. They would modulate the leader's output to a frequency they have associated with the brain's fear centers, like the amygdala. The subject, asleep in the next room, might be dreaming of a pleasant walk in a park. But as the external signal begins to subtly influence their brain activity, the dream begins to change. The sky in the park darkens. The trees begin to look menacing. A sense of unease creeps in. The subject's heart rate, monitored on a separate machine, begins to increase. Their breathing becomes shallow. The EEG patterns shift, reflecting a state of heightened anxiety. The pleasant walk has become a nightmare of being lost and pursued. The researcher, watching the readouts, makes a note. The induced emotional state has been successfully transmitted. Now, imagine a more complex task. Not just an emotion, but an image. The researchers would use a technique of associative conditioning. During waking hours, they would repeatedly show the subject a specific image, say, a red star, while simultaneously exposing them to a unique, complex electromagnetic frequency. The brain would begin to form a neurological link between the image and the signal. Then, when the subject is asleep and dreaming, the researchers would transmit that same specific frequency. In theory, the subject's dreaming mind, already primed by the conditioning, would spontaneously generate the image of the red star within their dream. The dream is no longer a private creation. It has been remotely edited. A piece of external data has been inserted into the subject's subconscious. What was the strategic purpose of such a bizarre line of research? The applications were chilling. For espionage, you could transmit a coded message, a location, a time, a name, to a deep cover agent in the form of a dream. The agent might not even consciously remember the dream, but the information would be lodged in their subconscious, ready to be accessed by a prearranged trigger. For psychological warfare, the possibilities were even more terrifying. Could you broadcast a signal over an entire enemy city that would induce nightmares? Could you create a wave of collective anxiety, of sleeplessness and terror that would erode the morale of a population or an army without firing a single shot? It sounds like science fiction, but within the paranoid logic of the Cold War, no possibility was considered too outlandish to be explored. Did these experiments ever succeed? The official records, if they ever existed, remain deeply classified or were destroyed during the collapse of the Soviet Union. What we have are fragments. Declassified CIA reports that express concern about Soviet advances in psychoenergetics, the testimonies of defectors who spoke of strange psychiatric research, and the documented existence of devices like the Leader machine, whose full range of applications remains a subject of debate. Most Western scientists remain deeply skeptical, arguing that the brain is far too complex and noisy an environment for such precise external manipulation to be effective. The skull itself is a powerful electromagnetic shield. The sheer number of neurons firing at any given moment would make the targeting of a specific dream state with a general external field almost impossible. But the mystery lingers. The Soviet approach to science was different. They were often more holistic, more willing to explore phenomena that did not fit neatly into the established Western paradigm. They were fascinated by the interplay between the body's electrical systems and the surrounding environment. Let's allow our minds to rest on this unsettling concept. The idea that the walls of our own skull are not as secure as we believe, that the private sacred space of our dreams might be accessible. As you lie in your own bed, on the verge of your own nightly journey into the subconscious, consider the profound privacy of that world. It is the one place where you are truly, absolutely alone with your own mind. The Soviet dream labs, whether they succeeded or failed, represent a fundamental violation of that last and most personal frontier. They sought to turn the dream world into a battlefield, a messaging system, a tool of the state. Allow the thought to be what it is, a quiet, unsettling speculation. Let it be a reminder of the precious, fragile nature of your own inner world. As you feel the gentle pull of sleep, the descent into your own private theatre, be grateful for its sanctity. Be grateful that your dreams, for tonight at least, are entirely your own. Let that feeling of security be a soft blanket, covering you as you drift into a deep, peaceful, and blissfully unmonitored sleep. Having explored the attempts to breach the chaotic realm of dreams, let us now turn to a more structured and in some ways more pragmatic field of Soviet sleep research. If dreams were too wild and unpredictable to be reliably controlled, perhaps the quieter, deeper stages of sleep held a different kind of potential. This brings us back to the strange and fascinating world of hypnopedia, or sleep learning. The concept is an old one, a recurring dream of humanity, to learn without effort, to absorb knowledge while the conscious mind rests. But in the Soviet Union of the 1960s and 70s, this was not just a fantasy. It was a serious, state-funded field of scientific inquiry. Researchers like the controversial Dr. Vladimir Rykov at the Moscow Research Institute of Psychiatry believed they were on the verge of a revolution in education and human potential. Let's picture the scene, not in a shadowy intelligence lab, but in a state-sanctioned pedagogical institute. The room is more like a dormitory than a laboratory. A dozen students are lying in neat rows of beds, their eyes closed. The air is filled with the soft, rhythmic sound of a recorded voice, speaking in a calm, monotonous tone. It might be a lesson in English vocabulary, a list of engineering formulas, or even a passage from Marxist-Leninist theory. The students are not just napping, they are participating in a state experiment to accelerate learning. The scientific theory behind this was tied to the understanding of sleep cycles. Soviet researchers, using EEG machines, meticulously mapped the different stages of sleep. They identified the periods of deep, slow-wave sleep as a time when the brain's normal filters, the critical faculties of the conscious mind, were at their lowest ebb. In this state, they theorized, the mind was like a sponge, ready to absorb raw information directly into the memory centers, bypassing the need for conscious effort and repetition. The process was highly technical. It wasn't simply a matter of playing a tape recorder all night. The audio had to be perfectly synchronized with the subject's sleep cycle. An EEG would monitor the student's brainwaves. When the pens traced the long, slow delta waves of deep sleep, a switch would be triggered, and the recorded lesson would begin to play softly through a pillow speaker. If the student began to drift into a lighter stage of sleep, or into REM sleep, the recording would stop so as not to disturb the natural dream process or wake the subject. The reported results were, according to Soviet-era scientific journals, astonishing. Students who participated in hypnopedia sessions were said to have dramatically higher rates of information retention than control groups who studied only during waking hours. They claimed that complex vocabularies could be memorized, that mathematical tables could be ingrained, and that even physical skills could be improved by listening to descriptions of the ideal movements. One famous, though likely exaggerated, experiment claimed to have taught a group of soldiers the basics of Morse code in a single night. The potential applications were vast and perfectly aligned with the goals of the Soviet state. Imagine being able to accelerate the training of scientists, engineers, and doctors, creating a generation of highly skilled specialists at an unprecedented rate. Imagine being able to quickly retrain factory workers for new industrial processes. The state saw hypnopedia as a tool for rapid modernization, a way to outpace the West not just in military might, but in intellectual capital. But as with all Soviet science, there was a darker, more ideological undercurrent. If you could teach a student the periodic table in their sleep, could you also teach them political doctrine? This is where the line between education and indoctrination becomes terrifyingly blurred. The same technology used to teach English vocabulary could be used to instill unwavering loyalty to the Communist Party. The same monotonous voice that recited engineering formulas could also recite political slogans, historical narratives tailored to the state's ideology, and paeans to the glory of the Premier. Let's imagine our student in the sleep dormitory. Tonight, the lesson is not mathematics. It is a curated history of the revolution. The voice speaks of the heroism of Lenin, the treachery of the counter-revolutionaries, the glorious destiny of the proletariat. The student is not consciously listening. Their critical mind, the part that might question, that might see nuance or contradiction, is asleep. The information is flowing directly into the subconscious, being laid down as foundational memory, as unquestionable truth. The student would wake in the morning with no specific memory of the lesson, but with a subtly reinforced sense of patriotic duty, a deeper, unexamined belief in the righteousness of the state's ideology. It is a form of brainwashing at its most insidious. Not the violent, coercive brainwashing of a prison camp, but a gentle, passive, and almost invisible process of mental conditioning. The state is not just educating its citizens, it is authoring their very thoughts, planting ideas that will feel as if they are the individual's own. Did this truly happen on a mass scale? The evidence is ambiguous. The science of hypnopedia itself is controversial. Western studies have generally concluded that while simple conditioning might be possible during sleep, the learning of complex semantic information is not. They argue that the successes reported by Soviet labs were likely due to other factors. The subjects subliminally hearing the information as they were falling asleep or waking up, or a placebo effect born from the belief that the process was working. Yet, the Soviet research in this area was extensive and spanned decades. They published numerous papers and held conferences on the subject. Was it all a scientific dead end, a product of ideological wishful thinking? Or did their different approach, their focus on hypnotic suggestion and precisely timed delivery, yield results that Western science has been unable to replicate? The mystery, once again, is in the disappearance. With the fall of the Soviet Union, much of this research was defunded. The institutes were closed, the researchers were scattered. The specific methodologies and the full extent of the programs, particularly their application in military and political contexts, were lost in the chaotic collapse of the Soviet state. We are left with a quiet and deeply relevant question. What is the nature of learning and belief? How much of what we know, what we believe to be true, is the product of our own conscious, critical thought? And how much is absorbed passively from the environment around us? The Soviet sleep learning experiments, in their most extreme form, represent the deliberate weaponization of this passive absorption. They are a stark reminder that the mind is not an impregnable fortress. It is a permeable membrane, constantly taking in information, especially when its guards are down. Let your mind settle on this thought. The image of a room full of sleeping students, their minds being gently, systematically inscribed with a state-approved reality. There is no violence here. There is no overt coercion. There is only a quiet voice in the darkness, speaking directly to the unguarded subconscious. It is a subtle horror, a different kind of lost experiment. It is not about a physical monster unleashed, but about the potential for a quiet, invisible tyranny over the mind itself. As you prepare for your own sleep, consider the inputs you have absorbed today, the news you read, the conversations you had, the media you consumed. Your mind will now begin its own quiet, nightly process of sorting, filing, and integrating that information. Let the story of the Soviet sleep labs be a gentle reminder of the power of that process. Let it be a reason to value the sanctity of your own mind, the importance of your own critical thought, and let the final thought before you drift off be one of peace. A quiet appreciation for the freedom to dream your own dreams and to think your own thoughts undisturbed. The gentle hum of the tape recorder fades, leaving only the sound of your own slow, peaceful breathing as you slip into a sleep that is entirely and beautifully your own.